I think, I wonder, how we silence ourselves because of the structure we're in, the methodologies that we have, the ways in things are going to be interpreted, that it ends up actually, even in wherever we are, it's another form of how we kind of find ourselves locked in.
And to all the brothers and sisters of all colors, and especially the younger generation who we are bequeathing the world to you, I have this to say. Wall Street and the critique of Wall Street and Occupy Wall Street movement for me is a matter of life and death. I was arrested twice. Police dragged us. Harlem, 125th Street and 7th Avenue, as well as in front of Goldman Sachs. We put Goldman Sachs on trial. 6-hour trial, guilty. Why? Because I decided a long time ago I was going to be part of the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Dorothy Day, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Gustavo Gutierrez, saying what? Engage in a fallible quest for unarmed truth, and the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, so you look at the world through the lens of the weak and vulnerable. I don't care what color, what civilization, what sexual orientation, to try to get outside of yourself. And also engage in a fallible quest for unconditional love, because I am a revolutionary Christian. I assure my dear honorable colleague, I am a revolutionary. You are absolutely right about that. Oh yeah, oh yeah, you got the right one. You got the right
one. During the last decade, we have discovered a number of new, powerful pattern matching algorithms that are useful for locating patterns in text. Many of these algorithms have been developed using insights obtained from theory, obtained by studying automata and language theory. As our knowledge of pattern matching algorithms increases, we can very quickly take this knowledge and package it in the form of Unix programs. And we can spread these Unix programs to the entire community very quickly.
The usual way to get a large computer application developed involves a big team of people working in close coordination. Most of the time this works surprisingly well, but it does have its problems. And large projects tend to get done poorly. They take a long time. They consume an astonishing amount of money. And in many cases, the individual team members are dissatisfied. So everybody in the computing business is constantly searching for ways to do a better job of developing computer applications.
When it comes to decent housing, we can't find a penny. When it comes to jobs with a living wage, we can't find a penny, but we find a... Is that a hand or is that just a camera? That's just a camera. But we find the money when it comes to jails and prisons for the weak and the vulnerable. I live in a society in which 22% of all of its children lived in poverty, the richest nation in the history of the world. That's morally obscene and spiritually profane. And I use the language of R.H. Tawney, one of my great heroes, the Christian socialism of R.H. Tawney, or the libertarian socialism of my dear hero, William Morris. There's a connection between what I'm talking about and the best of Oxford.
In the mythical man months, Fred Brooks estimates that it took 5,000 staff years of effort to produce the operating system for IBM's 360 series computers. Clearly, nobody is going to do that sort of thing very often, certainly not for every new type of hardware or for every new class of application.
Someone once said that software stands between the user and the machine, and to me this conveys this picture of a great wall of software up there that you have to overcome to get anything done. There's certainly a grain of truth in the remark anyway. If you stop to look, many operating systems seem to spend a substantial fraction of their time and effort not in helping you, but in impeding you, in making your job difficult, sort of providing obstacles to be overcome.
The last line of Percy Shelley's great revolutionary pamphlet, A Defense of Poetry. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And he's not talking about versifiers. He's talking about all human beings who decide to muster their imagination and empathy to conceive of a better world given the social misery and suffering in this world.
When Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie started building the Unix system in 1969, they found a structure which simplified many aspects of the interactions between computers and people. Thompson and Ritchie were aiming to keep their system simple, and they found a collection of primitives that enabled them to do a great deal with a very few primitives.
A Unix system is made up sort of 3 layers, if you like. The central layer, the kernel.
It's a step-by-step process. This is the early stages of not just a national movement, this is an international movement.
It's the thing that controls the resources of the machine. Then wrapped around that, at least conceptually, is something called the shell, which is the interface between most users and the kernel part. It sits there and waits for you to type commands at it, and then it interprets them.
Dr. West, do you think this is obviously it's 3 weeks old, it's hard to know what it is, let alone what it means to any component part of it?
And then around that, sort of yet another layer, are useful programs, things like editors and compilers for programming languages and document formatting programs, and programs that you write yourself.
Oh, we know there's an intimate connection between corporate greed running amok at the top and escalating poverty at the bottom.
And what you can do is to think of the Unix system programs basically as, in some sense, the building blocks with which you can create things. And the thing that distinguishes Unix systems from many other systems is the degree to which those building blocks can be glued together in a variety of different ways, not just obvious ways.
There's a cultural sensibility that is different in that regard.
In many cases, very unobvious ways to get different jobs done. The system is very flexible in that respect.
1% of the population in America get 81% of the income just a year and a half ago under my dear brother Barack Obama. With his Wall Street government.
Unix systems has many features which make it easier for the programmer to write programs. These include formatless files, the hierarchical directory structure, the ability to pipeline the output of one command as the input of another, device-independent I/O. All of these things make programming considerably easier than on most other systems.
Does anyone know the amount of the MIT Energy Initiative received from the petroleum companies? It's in the hundreds of millions, if not more. Yeah, go look for that. But they received at least several $100 million from the petroleum industry to say we're going to launch a new energy initiative. And so, you know, what can you say? The students mobilize, they forced the administration's hand to do something. What came out the other side of that was an investment in innovation around renewable energy, but one that was funded by these same actors who are, you know, they see the writing on the wall. They know that they're going to have to figure out how to shift their profitability strategy eventually from petroleum extraction, and so they want to be the ones to monetize the innovation in the sector. So anyway, that's a whole nother ballgame, is like when you move an institution to do something, what comes out the other side, you know, isn't necessarily what you were gunning for, but does that mean that we have to just sort of give up and throw up our hands and say, no, we can't shift things? Of course not. We can, and we are shifting things. And
the heart of the system is really the file system, the ability to store information for extended periods of time. And one of the reasons the system works as well as it does is that the file system is well designed. And in many systems, you have to say an awful lot about a file before you can do anything with it. You have to say where it is and how big it is and what kind of information that's going to be in it. All kinds of things that are basically utterly, completely irrelevant. Here, you don't have to do any of that. The file is as big as it is. It doesn't matter where it is as long as you know what it's called. And so You basically don't have to think of any of those complexities that you have in other systems. When you want information in a file, you put it there. When you want it back, you get it out again. And you don't have to think about size or number of records or number of fields or anything like that unless it's really germane to your program. For most purposes, it's utterly irrelevant.
A file is simply a sequence of bytes. Its main attribute is its size. By contrast, in more conventional systems, a file has a dozen or so attributes. To specify or create a file, it takes endless amounts of chit-chat. If you want a Unix system file, you simply ask for a file and you can use it interchangeably wherever you want a file.
What does it mean to create, what does inclusion mean? What is, I'm worried about the slippage to the language of diversity and inclusion in the innovation space, because partly what it could lead us to is a situation where we have lots more innovators and creators of color who then create, or women of color, et cetera, who create capitalist firms that at the end of the day end up extracting value from labor, from a bunch of people producing their devices, and so on and so forth. So how do we also shift the innovation ecosystem so that we're thinking about models of firms? For example, the conversation about platform cooperativism, the idea that we should be thinking about how do we launch firms that have something built into their DNA, something other than profit maximization in their actual corporate charters.
The Unix system consists of a hierarchy of directories. A directory is simply a file that contains the names of either other directories or files. And this whole thing goes on recursively. When you log into a Unix system, you normally are sitting in a place that's called your home directory or your users directory. And I can say pwd, which means print the name of my working directory, and it'll tell me where I am. It says at the moment that I'm in user pwk. And that's where I start when I log in. Now, I can go up a level in that. I can change to parent level, and now if I print my working directory, I'm in /user. And I can go up one more level to the root of the whole file system. Let me go back down to BWK, and I can list the files that I have in that directory, and I find there, among other things, a directory called TV.
There are a lot of folk out here who have a lot of legitimate grievances, and as long as these protests continue to grow, somebody in Washington is going to have to start asking them what their grievances are. So you lay out a list and we start talking about how we address the problems. There doesn't have to be one particular grievance, as was the case during the Civil Rights era.
And I can list the files that are there, and I'll find, among other things, the sentence that we printed in the spelling mistake finding program. Let me look at that, and sure enough, there it is.
So as you can see, the file system hierarchy makes it possible for users to organize information into its natural grouping and to go up or down and find things quickly and easily.
The Unix system interface for most people is through a program called the shell, or the command interpreter. And basically, it's simply a program that watches what you type and treats it as requests to run particular programs. Now, there's nothing magic about running programs. The programs that you run are actually just the names of files in the file system. The shell searches in the file system in a particular way to find a file whose name is the name of the program that you think you're running, and it goes and executes it. And in fact, it's not possible for you as a user, just by executing a program, to tell how that particular program has been implemented. For example, it might have been written in a language like Fortran or C, or it may have in fact been written as something like the spell program that we talked about earlier, which is a combination of other programs stuck together with pipes or some similar thing, and all put in a single file as a shell sequence or sequence of commands.
What Brian did earlier was he typed all the commands, the 5 program names, for his spelling checker on one line using the pipeline facilities. Now that's nice, except that you may want to check documents often, and you don't want to have to type that long sequence of commands. So it's possible to put all of these commands in a file and tell the shell, when I type the name of that file, I want you to execute the commands that are inside that file.
That's why Otis Redding said, try a little tenderness. He didn't say my name, say my name, say my name.
Let me show you an example of this. We have a program called Spline, which fits curves to a set of data points, and I've got a set of 5 data points that we're going to see what the curve looks like. I'm going to run spline through a program that turns this into graphics called graph, and I'm going to run that through a special program that turns the graphic language into something specific for this terminal.
Dan, straighten your back up, get a spine, and say what is on your mind in a critical way, but also say it with enough feeling that you might be able to inspire somebody.
I only need to type plot and data because inside the file plot is this string of commands. And here is the result of plotting those 5 data points on this particular terminal. The ability to put commands in files and only have to type the file name to get these commands executed makes the computing business a lot easier. Often you're doing things that are repetitive and you don't want to have to type long lists of things. This makes our life much easier and allows us to tailor our environment for the way we want to work.
The basic observation is you can think about essentially technology in a couple of different pieces. There's the core platform piece that developers build applications around, and that is sort of the core offering that developers and users can deploy and put into production. And then there's a set of edge technologies built around that core platform, whether in the case of an operating system, it's packages. In the case of some other technologies, it's plugins or extensions, whatever the case may be.
You know, you have a salary that's comfortable to live off of, right? You can show up every day and dedicate your work to it, and you don't have to worry about making ends meet.
Yeah.
And the other part is, you know, this kind of principle of fairness. You know, it's one thing to get paid enough to live off of, but if you're getting paid enough to live off of and you're making millions of dollars for your boss and he's living in this super fancy mansion, you know, even if you're doing all right, you feel like it's unjust and unfair, and it just makes you pissed off and unhappy.
You know, our open source strategy is essentially we have a set of free and open source core platforms which are offered entirely free to the developer community. It enables us to build what Jonathan Schwartz has referred to as volume drives value, so we build volume in the developer community.
The other thing we realized very quickly is that it had to be really open, you know, like a core part, but the plan was that this isn't something like, you know, I could do or a small group could do or, you know, even a big company could do. This is something that really has to be a collaboration between a lot of different people. So we've brought in publishers, we've brought in libraries, we've brought in book lovers, we've brought in reviewers. We're trying to get everyone to come together and contribute their data to one site where it's all available for free, it's all available for download and use. Everything is completely open. Anyone can contribute, anyone can take advantage of it, anyone can use it. We're just this kind of central hub coordinating all these different actors.
One is you have to have a broad enough vision that allows for solidarity work across a number of issues.
Dan, your name is very closely related with Debian,
Even among so-called progressives and leftists, they tend to be highly balkanized when it comes to very crucial issues. But one of the distinctive features of what I call loosely neoliberal soulcraft is to convince the younger generation there is no alternative to the status quo and the system under which we live. So you can be as creative and innovative as you want, but you're still a tinkerer because the overall structure cannot be changed. So you come in with truncated imagination. And that truncated imagination has a limited vision. And all of that rich creativity gets filtered within that context, that there is no alternative. I think what was exciting about my dear brother Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders is no revolutionary. I mean, I love my brother, he's a Brooklyn brother. He's no revolutionary, but as someone who talked about coming from a socialist tradition, that carried with it a notion that there is an alternative, that we can think and authorize reality outside of the existing framework. And the tremendous impact he had. We know that, you know, if the fellow citizens in this country, if the only persons could vote were under 30, Bernie would be in the White House right now rather than Donald Trump. And that says something about the younger generation. Same is true with a poll now, right? You got more young brothers and sisters of all colors who prefer socialism over capitalism. Now you're asking what does socialism mean? Well, things get vague. What does capitalism mean? They're talking about predatory capitalism. They're talking about the highly Wall Street driven lack of accountability, escalating wealth inequality, no serious focus on poverty, wage stagnation, and so forth and so on. So you have to be very clear that these polls are very, very loose and vague. But there's this sense of the need for imagination. This is true not just here, but all around the world. There are alternatives. Socially, economically, they're very difficult. They do build on what's in place. You don't work with a clean slate. But at the same time, you have to be able to think more broadly. And we've come out of a period where it was just almost, it was very, very difficult to convince young people that there was an alternative as opposed to just fitting in to the system and status quo. Things are beginning to become broader and looser, but I mean, we just hope it's not too late. I mean, the problem is that these catastrophes that I'm talking about, they are impending in such an intense way. And the authoritarian populisms that are taking over, Turkey, Kenya, India, USA, these are neo-fascist folk emboldened everywhere you go. It's not just the United States. We just hope it's not too late. But whether it's too late or not, we got to commit ourselves to go down fighting. I mean, I come from a tradition that says it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And it's got to be some sting in the swing in terms of hit, bite, analysis that keeps track of the least of these. And then you go down swinging. And you pass it on to the younger generation with a smile. You got to keep a smile. You got to keep a smile because there's got to be some joy in it. If it's just done out of joylessness, then you're not going to be a long distance runner. You're not going to be a long distance. You're not going to stay in it for long.
Hi, I'm Aaron Swartz. I've done a couple things, I guess the latest of which I co-founded a startup called Reddit.com and a new site called Open Library, and my latest project is a site called Watchdog.net.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
How you doing today?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm not doing too bad. It's a nice day here in Washington, D.C. I've been suffering from a little bit of some kind of virus, so if I sound froggy later on, it's because my vocal cords are fragile. But I'm Will Wilkinson here at the Cato Institute, and Aaron, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm more of an anarcho-socialist than an anarcho-capitalist, so I tend to think, the way if we're going to succeed with privacy, it's not going to be because every individual person decides to encrypt their communications and, use anonymous cache, but more because we're, as a society, will come together and pass regulations that will force corporations to, not keep certain types of data or keep it private or do things like that. And I think, I do worry about privacy, not, and I guess it's not because of any particular thing that's happened to me, but just because I sort of worry about this, this encroaching database state where, I have these customized mailers that come to my house and, these political people who knock on my door and already know what kind of food I eat and, what kind of politicians that I tend to vote for. And it's just, it feels kind of creepy in some weird guttural sense to have these other people knowing so much about you. Even if the average person isn't going to get abused, I think there's a real potential for abuse, not only through things like identity theft, but also just, by being able to beat up on people who have certain kinds of politics and, like people who support gay rights organizations in neighborhoods where, being gay isn't very popular. And I think there's a real danger that people's secrets and stuff will end up getting out, whether through these leaks of these corporations or otherwise, and people will get punished for having deviant beliefs or for doing strange things.
Yeah, I think I agree. But it seems like, so the question is whether the regulation of how this information is released in the right context, whether that's something that's taken care of by sort of explicit regulation, or whether that's something that's taken care of by sort of evolving social norms. And over time, I think that it kind of has to be, the regulation in some sense is just going to follow the social norm anyway. And one of the things that's awkward about the availability of this new information is that sometimes you get this lag between the existence of the database and the norm that governs how people are going to use it. So you get these sort of abuses in the gap between the invention of the new technology and the regulation by a new norm. I don't know if that's me thinking off the top of my head, but I'm never sure the extent to which the explicit regulation of who can use what data is harmful or helpful, and that's why I've remained really sort of agnostic on this issue over time.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's interesting you mentioned Google in particular, because I think they're one of the greatest threats to privacy out there at the moment. You know, right now, if you look at Google, they have, you know, your email. If you use Gmail, they have your calendar. If you use Google Calendar, they have everything you search for, which, if you're someone like me, is just an enormous amount of information about you. They have, you know, increasingly all these new services, like the videos you watch, your healthcare records. They're just collecting this enormous database. And so I see kind of two problems with that. One is, you know, they could kind of institutionally use it in a way that's creepy. So they use all that information to generate targeted ads and things, you know, which kind of feels weird, but, you know, it hasn't really been a serious problem right now. But also, I do kind of worry, you know, Google employs 30,000 people or something now, right? You know, if one of those happens to get in a fight with me and decide to go look up all my information in the database, you know, they would know just about everything about me. You know, even secrets that I just happen to email or IM with my girlfriend, right? Since they keep logs of every email and every IM, they would have access to all of those. And so I don't know how you stop someone from kind of going rogue and abusing that data, but it's a very real concern when it's consolidated in one big company. Yeah, I was thinking about how I feel when I'm procrastinating on something, right? And I just feel like my brain is, you know, pushing up against this immovable force. Like, I know I have to do this thing, but I just can't make it move. And it feels like in my head, like, you know, the same feeling you get when you push two magnets against each other and they're just repelling each other, and you just have to push really hard to make them touch.
This audio recording was made possible by organizations working together for people, not profit.